Chapter 4: The Magical Misfit, J.K. Rowling's Journey from Welfare to Wizardry. By Michael Tafler, copyright 2025. Edinburgh, Scotland, 1995. The cold seeped through the windows of the Nicholsons' café, but Joanne Rowling couldn't afford to return to her unheated apartment just yet. She pulled her coat tighter and adjusted the blanket covering her sleeping baby daughter in the second-hand stroller beside her. The cafe owner, sympathetic to her situation, had stopped asking her to buy another cup of coffee hours ago. On the table before her lay several pages of a manuscript, covered with neat handwriting and occasional coffee stains. The stack was growing slowly, page by page, day by day. The story of a boy wizard that had come to her fully formed during a delayed train journey from Manchester to London nearly 5 years earlier. At 30, Joanne was not where she had expected to be at this point in her life. A university graduate with a degree in French and Classics from Exeter, she had once harbored dreams of becoming a writer, but had pursued more practical work as a researcher and bilingual secretary for Amnesty International. Then had come her mother's death, a failed marriage in Portugal, and her return to Britain as a single mother with no job, no home of her own, and a dependency on state benefits to survive. Writing was the only thing that truly absorbed me, she would later explain. The only thing that took me completely out of myself. So, she wrote, in cafés, because they were warmer than her small apartment, during her daughter Jessica's naps, because those precious moments of quiet were rare. At night, after putting Jessica to bed, by the dim light of a table lamp to save on electricity. The novel became her escape, her hope, and increasingly, her plan for financial survival. That afternoon in Nicholson's cafe, a well-dressed businessman gave her a disapproving glance, another person assuming she was just another welfare recipient wasting time. If only he knew that the pages in front of her would eventually generate more wealth than most multinational corporations, employ thousands, and bring joy to millions of children worldwide. But on that cold Edinburgh afternoon, such a future seemed as fantastical as the wizarding world she was creating, one sentence at a time. Joanne Kathleen Rowling's early life had given no particular indication of the extraordinary success that awaited her. Born in 1965 near Bristol, England, she grew up in a middle-class family with parents who emphasized the importance of reading but worried about stable careers. Her childhood was marked by her mother Anne's diagnosis with multiple sclerosis when Rowling was a teenager, an experience that would later inform the themes of death and loss that permeate the Harry Potter series. I had been writing continuously since the age of 6, Rowling later recalled, but I had never been so ambitious about writing a novel as I was after my mother died. Her death made me realize that life is short and you should pursue what truly matters to you. After graduating from university, Rowling worked at Amnesty International in London, where she was exposed to stories of tremendous human suffering and courage that would influence her worldview and eventually her writing. But it was during a 4-hour delayed train journey from Manchester to London in 1990 that the character of Harry Potter first formed in her mind. I was staring out the window, and the idea for Harry just came. He appeared in my mind's eye, very fully formed. I could see the lightning scar. I knew he didn't know he was a wizard until he was 11. I knew he had been at the center of some tragedy which he couldn't remember, but which had changed his life forever. It was the most extraordinary feeling. Without a pen to write down her ideas, Rowling spent the entire journey developing the world of Hogwarts in her mind. By the time the train reached London, the foundations for a 7-book series had been laid. Shortly after, Rowling moved to Portugal to teach English as a foreign language. There she met and married Portuguese journalist Jorge Arantes, and in 1993 gave birth to their daughter, Jessica. The marriage was short-lived and tumultuous, ending after just 13 months when Rowling left with her infant daughter, fleeing what she would later describe as an abusive relationship. "I left with nothing but 3 chapters of Harry Potter and my daughter in a suitcase," she recounted in a later interview, the pain of that period still evident in her voice. She returned to Britain, settling in Edinburgh near her sister, and found herself in dire circumstances. An unemployed single mother dependent on state welfare benefits of £70 per week, about $100 at the time. "I was as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless," she later wrote. "I was a single parent, a pessimistic demographic statistic, a welfare recipient." Diagnosed with clinical depression, Rowling even contemplated suicide during this dark period of her life. But throughout it all, she continued to write. "I'm sorry, Ms. Rowling, but children's books just don't sell well enough to justify taking on new authors in that category." The literary agent's rejection letter was polite but firm, joining a growing pile of similar responses. It was 1995, and Rowling had completed her manuscript for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone after 5 years of work. With no connections in the publishing world, she had researched potential agents in the local library, meticulously typing out query letters on an old manual typewriter because she couldn't afford photocopying. After finishing the novel, Rowling had carefully typed the manuscript on an old manual typewriter she had purchased second-hand. Unable to afford photocopying, she typed each submission package separately, a laborious process that demonstrated both her determination and her desperation. The rejections accumulated quickly. Major British publishing houses showed no interest in a lengthy children's novel by an unknown author. Some complained about the book's length, others about its complex vocabulary, still others about the dark themes that they felt might frighten younger readers. One evening, as Rowling sorted through the day's mail, including another rejection letter, her daughter Jessica, now a toddler, tugged at her sleeve. "Mummy sad?" she asked, her small face concerned. Rowling forced a smile. "No, darling, Mummy's just thinking." She was thinking about how to explain to her daughter that the magical world they both escaped into during bedtime stories might never become more than their private fantasy. She was thinking about the teaching course she had begun, a practical backup plan for when the Harry Potter dream inevitably faded. And she was thinking about whether the next batch of query letters might need to be sent under the gender-neutral J.K. Rowling instead of Joanne Rowling, a suggestion made by an editor who thought boys might not want to read a book written by a woman. But most of all, she was thinking about Harry, the boy wizard who had become so real to her that abandoning his story felt like a betrayal. "We'll keep trying, Jess," she told her daughter, setting aside the rejection letter. "Sometimes the hardest magic takes the most patience." In August 1996, after a year of rejections, Rowling's manuscript landed on the desk of Christopher Little, a literary agent who had established his agency just a few years earlier. Little's assistant, Bryony Evans, pulled Rowling's submission from the slush pile primarily because she was intrigued by the black plastic folder it was contained in, different from the usual manila envelopes. Little decided to represent Rowling, though he cautioned her not to get her hopes up. Children's literature was a difficult market, and unknown authors rarely received significant advances. With an agent now championing her work, Rowling allowed herself a glimmer of hope. She continued her teacher training course, a practical fallback, but the Harry Potter manuscript was now making the rounds of publishers, with the weight of Little's agency behind it. The pattern of rejection continued. 8 large publishing houses turned down the manuscript before it reached Barry Cunningham, an editor at Bloomsbury Publishing, a small London-based company that had only recently begun publishing children's books. Cunningham picked up the manuscript one evening, intending to read just a chapter or 2 before bed. Instead, he found himself still reading in the early hours of the morning, captivated by the world Rowling had created. The next day, He shared the manuscript with his 8-year-old daughter, Alice. Her enthusiastic response confirmed what he already suspected. There was something special about this story. In a small conference room at Bloomsbury's offices, Cunningham met with Rowling to discuss publishing Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. His offer was modest, an advance of £2,500, about $4,000, reflecting the publisher's cautious approach to children's literature. "I advise you to get a day job," Cunningham told her candidly. "It's extremely difficult to make money writing children's books." Rowling nodded, still pursuing her teaching certification, even as she signed the contract. The advance, while small by publishing standards, was life-changing for someone subsisting on welfare benefits. She immediately used part of it to purchase a better typewriter for the second Harry Potter book, which she had already begun writing. Bloomsbury's initial print run was just 500 copies, with 300 distributed to libraries. The modest expectations for the book were reflected in the painstaking decision-making about even minor details. One significant change was to the title for the American market, where Scholastic would later publish the book as Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, believing that American children would be deterred by the word philosopher. None of the parties involved, not Rowling, not Cunningham, not the Bloomsbury executives, had any inkling that they were about to launch what would become one of the most successful literary franchises in history. On June 26, 1997, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone appeared in bookshops across Britain with little fanfare. There was no marketing budget to speak of, no promotional tour, no advertisements, just a children's book with an intriguing cover showing a boy on a railway platform. Initial reviews were positive but limited in reach. Sales were modest, but encouraging enough that Bloomsbury ordered a second print run, another 500 copies. Then something unexpected happened. Children began talking about the book. They recommended it to friends. They asked teachers to read it aloud in class. They pestered parents to buy copies for siblings and cousins. The whispered recommendations grew into excited conversations, and those conversations expanded into a groundswell of enthusiasm that caught publishers and booksellers completely off guard. Within months, Bloomsbury was rushing to print thousands of additional copies to meet a demand that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Meanwhile, Rowling continued to write the sequel, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, still uncertain whether the modest success of her first book would translate into a sustainable career. She had completed her teaching certification as a backup plan, but was now able to postpone entering the classroom as royalty checks began to arrive with increasing frequency. The turning point came when Scholastic purchased the American rights to the book for an unprecedented $105,000, more than 20 times what would be typical for a children's book by an unknown author. The news made headlines in the UK publishing industry, transforming Rowling overnight from a struggling single mother to a literary success story. When Arthur Levine, the Scholastic editor who had acquired the American rights, was asked why he had paid such an extraordinary sum, he explained, "Because when I read this book, I couldn't put it down, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. That almost never happens." In the United States, the newly titled Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was released in September 1998 with a first printing of 50,000 copies, a significant number for a debut children's novel. Again, the book's success relied less on marketing and more on the organic enthusiasm of young readers sharing their discovery with friends. By December 1999, the first 3 Harry Potter books occupied the top 3 slots on the New York Times bestseller list, an unprecedented achievement that eventually led the newspaper to create a separate children's bestseller list to make room for other adult titles. The woman who had once written in cafés to save on heating costs had become a publishing phenomenon, with translations in dozens of languages and millions of copies sold worldwide. Film rights were sold to Warner Brothers for a seven-figure sum, further expanding the reach of Rowling's wizarding world beyond the printed page. In March 2001, less than 4 years after the publication of her first book, British newspapers reported a startling fact. J.K. Rowling had amassed a fortune that exceeded that of Queen Elizabeth II. The welfare recipient who had once carefully rationed coffee to prolong her time in Edinburgh's heated cafés was now worth an estimated £226 million, making her not only Britain's highest-earning author, but one of the country's wealthiest women. The Harry Potter series continued with the release of 4 more books, each breaking publishing records. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, published in 2000, sold 3 million copies in the United States within the first 48 hours. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the final installment released in 2007, sold 11 million copies in the first 24 hours, the fastest-selling book in history. The film adaptations of the books became the highest-grossing film series of all time. Merchandise, theme park attractions, video games, and countless other licensed products expanded the Harry Potter empire into a multi-billion-dollar phenomenon. For Rowling, the transformation from welfare recipient to cultural icon brought both opportunities and challenges. She established charitable trusts, including the Volant Charitable Trust, which combats poverty and social inequality, and became a vocal advocate for single parents and those struggling with depression. In a 2008 commencement address at Harvard University, Rowling reflected on the period before her success. "I was the biggest failure I knew. An exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded. I was jobless, a lone parent, and as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless." She continued, "Failure gave me an inner security that I had never attained by passing examinations. Failure taught me things about myself that I could have learned no other way. I discovered that I had a strong will and more discipline than I had suspected. I also found out that I had friends whose value was truly above rubies." This perspective on failure, as a stripping away of non-essentials, as a foundation rather than an endpoint, became central to Rowling's public identity. The woman who had once been pitied as a welfare mom now spoke to Harvard graduates about the benefits of failure with an authority few could claim. In many ways, Rowling's story has become as compelling as the fictional world she created, a modern fairy tale about a single mother who wrote herself out of poverty and into history. Yet this narrative sometimes obscures the genuine struggle, self-doubt, and persistence that characterized those difficult years in Edinburgh. On a rainy afternoon in 2023, a different café in Edinburgh, the Elephant House, displays a proud sign in its window: "Birthplace of Harry Potter." Inside, tourists snap photos and order coffee, hoping to absorb some of the creative magic that once filled the space. Few realize that Rowling actually wrote in several Edinburgh cafés, seeking warmth and escape from her unheated apartment. The Elephant House was just one of many. In a strange twist of literary fate, these cafés have become pilgrimage sites for Harry Potter fans. The actual table where Rowling once sat, nursing a single coffee for hours while her baby daughter slept beside her, has been preserved like a shrine. The irony is not lost on Rowling. "It's surreal," she admitted in a rare interview about those early days. "I remember feeling so conscious of taking up space in those cafés. Always worried the owners would ask me to leave because I wasn't ordering enough. Now, people visit those same cafés because I used to write there." The journey from welfare to wizardry transformed not just Rowling's life, but the landscape of children's literature. Publishers, who had once insisted that children don't read long books, were forced to reconsider as young readers devoured the increasingly hefty Harry Potter volumes. The artificial boundary between children's and adult literature blurred as readers of all ages openly embraced Rowling's creation. Beyond its commercial success, the Harry Potter series achieved something remarkable. It turned a generation of children into readers in an era of digital distractions. Parents reported children refusing to attend birthday parties because they were in the middle of a Harry Potter book. Schools noted increased library usage. Bookstores held midnight release parties, attended by thousands of children dressed as wizards and witches, eager to purchase new volumes. For all the fantastical elements of her creation, the flying broomsticks, the magical spells, the mythical creatures, Rowling's greatest conjuring act may have been transforming her own life from a narrative of failure to one of extraordinary success. The story of Harry Potter, the boy who lived under the stairs before discovering his true identity, contains echoes of Rowling's own journey from welfare recipient to literary phenomenon. Both narratives hinge on the same essential revelation, that circumstances of birth or misfortune need not determine one's ultimate destiny. This parallel between creator and creation adds a meta-layer to the Harry Potter phenomenon. Readers who cheered for Harry's triumph over adversity were simultaneously, if unconsciously, celebrating Rowling's real-life victory over her own challenges. Yet perhaps the most magical aspect of Rowling's story is its starting point, that delayed train from Manchester to London, where a young woman, with no particular prospects, stared out a window and allowed her imagination to wander. In that ordinary moment of frustration, a delayed train, a day going off track, was born an extraordinary creative vision that would transform her life and touch millions of others. J.K. Rowling didn't just fail upward, she transformed failure itself into the raw material of her success. The poverty and depression that might have ended her story became instead its most compelling chapter. The rejection letters that might have silenced her became footnotes in a much larger narrative of persistence. Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life, Rowling told the Harvard graduates. In this simple statement lies the essence of her remarkable journey, and perhaps the most enduring magic of all.